Hello to all the ham radio enthusiasts and others. This is Chris VK3AML in Burwood East, starting tonight's regular transmission on 147.475, and if you care to look us up on internet to look in on what we're doing, look for, or rather Google, the phrase VK3AML 3 July 2021. That's again, search for VK3AML 3 July 2021, and that should take you to our YouTube live stream, which we try to do every week. You may notice that the audio on the YouTube live stream is considerably better this week. We've actually managed to get a number of these things. These are 600 ohm to 600 ohm high audio quality isolation transformers to get rid of a bit of RF feedback that we've been getting down the audio lines here, and these also have better frequency response than the transformers that I was using on audio lines prior to last week. So you should hear us with considerably better clarity, and I've equalised this microphone in front of me, which is an AKG D880. I've equalised it for the acoustics of this room and the characteristics of my voice, so it should give you better results than before. These regular Saturday night broadcasts started as far back as 1972, I think it was, when my predecessor with my call sign, Tony Sanderson, VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, operating from 23 Park Street, Elstonwick, started a tradition of Saturday night crossbands, talking from 2 metres back to 160 metres where he operated. I'm not yet set up for HF, so I can't yet do the crossband side of things. I hope to do that in the next few months with the addition of an ANAN software-defined transceiver to the outfit here, which at the moment just consists of this VHF gear. In which case we'll by that time have a very good quality sideband, extended bandwidth sideband signal on 3670 kilohertz. But at the moment, VHF only plus the internet stream, VK3AML 3 July 2021. The crossband side of things was continued as a regular Saturday night institution by Dave, VK3ASE, from the southeastern inner suburbs, Ormond, Glen Huntly, from 1980 through to about 2019. And for the last 18 months or so, I've been taking up the Saturday night spot. I hope it offends nobody and adds a little to the interest in ham radio particularly. So tonight I'll be dealing with audio mythology and audio techniques, with specific emphasis on ham radio and the sort of things we should do there. With ham radio, for example, setting up balanced short audio lines in the shack using these 600 ohm to 600 ohm audio transformers allows you to connect one device with another with minimal RF feedback from your nearby transmitters. And this will become particularly important as increasingly amateurs are connecting their computer equipment, sound cards particularly, to transmitters. You don't want to get RF feedback into your computer. You also need to interface your computer to your transmitter if you're running FT8, any digital mode, slow scan television, whatever. you need to be able to connect the computer to the transmitter with minimum distortion, a very tightly controlled level, which you can use an automatic level control such as a peak limiter to determine. And so consequently, I'll be talking a little bit about computer interfacing to transmitters tonight. But mostly I'll be talking about audio mythology. Audio mythology. The power of marketing people to overcome any scientific basis whatever by buzzwords such as presence, or in the case of valve amplifiers, warm sound. What does warm sound supposed to mean? Without any definition at all, I suggest it means nothing. It's a marketing buzzword. And that applies to a lot of things. Very recently, a hi-fi enthusiast, unfortunately one not exhibiting very much technical ability, showed me a power cord that he'd used on very good advice, it appears, marketing advice, to connect from the wall socket, 240-volt wall socket, to his amplifier. The power cord was a so-called top-end power cord, costing well over $100, where you could probably buy an extension cord just as effective for about $20. And he believed it would give him better sound. I would question, what about the rest of the wiring in your house and the power line to the generators in the Latrobe Valley, 50 kilometres away? How will they affect your audio power amplifier? Well, these are things that people generally don't think about. But one person who has thought a lot about them is Douglas Self. He was a writer for the prestigious publication Wireless World in the 1970s, 80s and 90s. He's now in his early 70s. He occupies a position in audio engineering authorship today that's paralleled by the reputations of John Lindsley Hood or Ben Dawson. They're all formally qualified in science engineering, immune to the mythology of bogus audio marketing, and there's a lot of that about. Douglas Self has the reputation today of being the equivalent of G.A. Briggs in the 1950s. That is, he's at the forefront of acoustic theory and measurement, and not afraid to smash commonly held misconceptions, especially those associated with the expensive marketing of bogus audio improvements, put that in inverted commas, which exploit a marketplace that's rife with gullible engineering ignorance. Douglas Self's a British electronics engineer. He received first-class honours degree in engineering from Cambridge University and then studied psychoacoustics at Sussex University. He's the author of 6 books on audio electronics published by Focal Press. He's also contributed many articles, as I mentioned, to Wireless World magazine, some of which were compiled into a book along with articles by Peter Baxendall. He's taken out a number of audio-related patents, including one for a crossover displacement circuit. He's worked with several major companies, including Cambridge Audio, TAG McLaren Audio, and Soundcraft Electronics. Circuit Seller website described him as a renowned audio specialist when discussing a design he created for Elector magazine. Douglas Self developed the concept of a blameless amplifier in which all the main sources of distortion were reduced to inaudible levels. Self's books have been well received. His Audio Power Amplifier Design Handbook was recommended by Walter Jung and described as famous by audio website Hi-Fi Sonics. The second edition of his small signal audio design received a very positive review in Sound on Sound magazine. Now, one of the major areas where Douglas Self has stuck his neck out, and I fully support him in this, is the area of science in audio versus subjectivism. That is, measurement versus subjective human impressions. It could also be described as the difference between instrumental measurement and religious belief in audio. And Douglas Self writes, audio engineering is in a singular position. There can be few branches of engineering science rent so thoroughly from top to bottom by such a fundamental disagreement as the subjectivist-rationalist dichotomy. Subjectivism is still a significant issue in the hi-fi section of the industry, but has made little headway in professional audio, where intimate acquaintance with the original sound and the pressing need to earn a living with reliable and affordable equipment provide effective barriers against most irrational flights of fashion. Note the opposite of subjectivist is not objectivist. I understand this term refers to the followers, if any, of the philosophies of Ayn Rand. Most technologies have universally accepted measures of performance car makers to compete and improve miles per hour and miles per gallon. Computer manufacturers boast MIPs, that is, millions of instructions per second, and so on. Improvement in these parameters is universally accepted as progress. In the field of hi-fi, many people seem to have difficulty in deciding which direction forward is. Working as a professional audio engineer, I often encounter opinions which, while an integral part of the subjectivist offshoot of hi-fi, are treated with ridicule by practitioners of other branches of electrical engineering. The would-be designer is not likely to be encouraged by being told that audio is not far removed from witchcraft and that no one truly knows what they are doing. I've been told by a subjectivist that the operation of the human ear is so complex that its interaction with measurable parameters lies forever beyond human comprehension. I hope this is an extreme position, for it was proffered as a flat statement rather than as a basis for discussion. I've studied audio design from the viewpoints of electronic design, psychoacoustics, and my own humble efforts at musical creativity. I've found complete skepticism towards subjectivism to be the only tenable position. Nonetheless, if hitherto unsuspected dimensions of audio quality are ever shown to exist, then I look forward keenly to exploiting them. No doubt that the most esoteric of opinions are held in complete sincerity. Let's look at the subjectivist position. A short definition of the subjectivist position on power amplifiers for audio might read as follows. Number 1. Objective measurements of an amplifier's performance are unimportant compared with the subjective impressions received in informal listening tests. Should the two contradict the objective measured results, then the measured results may be dismissed out of hand. Subjectivist point 2. Degradation effects exist in amplifiers that are unknown to engineering science and are not revealed by the usual measurements. Subjectivist point 3. Considerable latitude may be used in suggesting hypothetical mechanisms of audio impairment, such as mysterious capacitor shortcomings and subtle cable defects, without reference to the plausibility of the concept or gathering any evidence to support it. Douglas Self believes this is a reasonable statement of the situation. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority of the public buy conventional hi-fi systems, ignoring the expensive and esoteric high-end sector where this debate is fiercest. It may appear unique that a sizable part of a technical industry has set off in a direction that is quite counter to the facts. It might be felt that such a loss of direction in a scientific subject would be unprecedented. This is not so. Parallel events that suggest themselves include the destruction of the study of genetics under Lysenko in USSR. Another possibility is the study of parapsychology, now in deep trouble because after some 100 years of investigation, it has not uncovered the ghost of a repeatable phenomenon. This sounds all too familiar. It could be argued that parapsychology is a poor analogy because most people would accept that there was nothing there to study in the first place, whereas nobody would assert that objective measurements and subjective sound quality have no correlation at all. One need only pick up the telephone to remind oneself of what a 4 kHz bandwidth and 10% or so of total harmonic distortion sounds like. A startlingly close parallel in the history of science is the almost forgotten affair of Blondlot and the N-rays. In 1903, René Blondlot, a respected French physicist, claimed to have discovered a new form of radiation which he called N-rays. This was shortly after the discovery of X-rays by Rontgen, so rays were in the air, as it were, and so was a desire to keep up with the Germans. The N radiation was apparently mysteriously refracted by aluminium prisms, but the crucial factor was that its presence could only be shown by subjective assessment of the brightness of an electric arc allegedly affected by those N rays. No objective measurement appeared to be possible. To Blondlot and at least 14 of his professional colleagues, the subtle changes in brightness were real, and the French Academy published more than 100 papers on the subject. Unfortunately, N-rays were completely imaginary, a classic product of the experimenter expectancy effect. This was demonstrated by American scientist Robert Wood, who quietly pocketed the aluminium prism during a demonstration without affecting Blondlot's recital of the results. This was widely reported by the famous reporter-explorer William Seabrook, and the N-ray industry collapsed extremely quickly. It was a major embarrassment at the time, but is now almost forgotten. This demonstrates with brutal clarity that it's quite possible for large numbers of sincere people to deceive themselves when trying to perform subjective assessments of phenomena. Let's look at a brief history of subjectivism. The early history of sound reproduction is notable for the number of times that observers reported that an acoustic wind-up gramophone gave results indistinguishable from reality. Such statements throw light on how powerfully mindset affects subjective impressions. When interest in sound reproduction grew in the post-war period, technical standards such as DIN 45-500 were set, though they were soon criticised as too permissive. By the late 1960s, it was almost universally accepted that the hi-fi requirements would be met by, let's say, THD, total harmonic distortion, less than 0.1%, with no significant crossover distortion, frequency response 20 Hz to 20 kHz at the 3 dB points, and as little noise as possible, please. The early 1970s expanded this to include slew rates and properly behaved overload protection, but the approach was always scientific, and it was perfectly normal to read amplifier reviews in which measurements were dissected, but no mention was made of listening tests. Following the growth of subjectivism through the pages of one of the leading subjectivist magazine, that is, Hi-Fi News, the first intimation of things to come was the commencement of Paul Messenger's column Subjective Sounds in September 1976. He said, and we quote, "The assessment will be almost purely subjective, which has both strengths and weaknesses, as the inclusion of laboratory data would involve too much time and space. And although the ear may be the most fallible, it's also the most sensitive evaluation instrument." Unquote. This is subjectivism as an expedient rather than a policy. Significantly, none of the early instalments contained any references to amplifier sound. In March 1977, an article by Gene Hiraga was published attacking high levels of negative feedback and praising the sound of an amplifier with 2% total harmonic distortion. In the same issue, Paul Messenger stated that a Radford valve amplifier sounded better than a transistor one, and by the end of that year, the amplifier sound bandwagon was rolling. Hiraga returned in August 1977 with a highly contentious set of claims about audible speaker cables, and after that no hypothesis was too unlikely to receive attention. Let's look at the limits of human perception. In evaluating the subjectivist position, it's essential to consider the known abilities of the human ear. Contrary to the impression given by some commentators who call constantly for more psychoacoustical research, an enormous amount of hard scientific information already exists on this subject, and some of it may be briefly summarised thus. The smallest step change in amplitude that can be detected is about 0.3 dB for a pure tone. In more realistic situations, it's 0.5 to 1 dB. This is about a 10% change. The smallest detectable change in frequency of a tone is about 0.2% in the band 500 Hz to 2 kHz. In percentage terms, this is the parameter for which the ear is most sensitive. The least detectable amount of harmonic distortion is not an easy figure to determine. Many variables are involved, and in particular, the continuously varying signal levels mean the level of THD generated is also dynamically changing. With mostly low-order harmonics present, the just detectable amount is about 1%, though crossover distortion can be perceived at 0.3% and possibly lower. There is certainly no evidence that an amplifier producing 0.001% total harmonic distortion sounds any cleaner than one producing 0.005%. It's below the threshold of human hearing. Total harmonic distortion measurements taken with the usual notch-type equalizer are of limited use in predicting the subjective impairment produced by an imperfect audio path. With music and so forth, intermodulation effects are demonstrably more important than the harmonics themselves. However, total harmonic distortion tests do have the unique advantage that inspection of the distortion residual on an oscilloscope gives an experienced observer immediate insight into the root cause of the nonlinearity. Many other distortion tests exist which, though yielding very little information to the designer, exercise the whole audio bandwidth at once and correlate well with properly conducted tests for subjective impairment by distortion. The so-called Belcher intermodulation test, unfortunate name, the principle is shown in a figure that I'm showing on the YouTube live stream at the moment, but people that are listening on the radio will have to imagine it, deserves more attention than it has received. The Belcher test may become popular now that DSP chips are becoming cheaper and cheaper. An objection often made to total harmonic distortion testing is that its resolution doesn't allow verification and that no nonlinearities exist at very low level, presumably some sort of micro crossover distortion. Hawksford, for example, has stated, quote, low-level threshold phenomena set bounds upon the ultimate transparency of an audio system, unquote, and several writers have claimed that some metallic contacts consist of a net of so-called microdiodes. Actually, this sort of mischievous hypothesis can easily be disposed of using enhanced total harmonic distortion techniques. I evolved a method of measuring THD down to 0.01% at 200 microvolts RMS and applied it to large electrolytics, connectors of varying provenance, and lengths of copper cable with and without alleged magic audio properties. The method required the design of an ultra-low noise, that is EIN equals minus 150 dBu for a 10 source resistance, and very low total harmonic distortion. The measurement method is shown in the figure below. I will put that up on the YouTube live stream, using an attenuator with very low resistance values to reduce the incoming signal, which keeps the Johnson noise to a minimum. In no case was any unusual distortion detected, and it would be nice to think that this red herring of microdiodes, or electrolytic distortion, or copper cable distortion, at least has been laid to rest. Interchannel crosstalk can obviously degrade stereo separation, but the effect is not detectable to the ear until it's worse than 20 dB, which would be a very bad amplifier indeed. Phase and group delay have been an area of dispute for a long time. As Stanley Lipschitz et al. Have pointed out, these effects are obviously perceptible if they're gross enough. If an amplifier was so heroically misconceived as to produce the top half of the audio spectrum 3 hours after the bottom half, there would be little room for argument. More practically, concern about phase has centred on loudspeakers and their crossovers, as the only place where a phase shift might exist without an accompanying frequency response change to make it obvious. Lipschitz appears to have demonstrated that a second-order cross all-pass filter, an all-pass filter which gives a frequency-dependent phase shift without level changes, is audible, whereas BBC findings, as reported by Harwood, indicate the opposite, and the truth of the matter is still not clear. This controversy is of limited importance to amplifier designers, as it would take a truly spectacular incompetence to produce a circuit that included an accidental all-pass filter. Without all-pass filtering, the phase response of an amplifier is completely defined by its frequency response and vice versa. In control theory, this is Bode's second law, and it should be much more widely known in the hi-fi world than it is. A properly designed amplifier has its response roll-off points, high and low, not too far outside the audio band, and these will have accompanying phase shifts, but there is no evidence that these are perceptible. The picture of the ear that emerges from psychoacoustics and related fields is not that of a precision instrument. Its ultimate sensitivity, directional capabilities, and dynamic range are far more impressive than its ability to measure small level changes or detect correlated low-level signals like distortion harmonics. This is unsurprising. From an evolutionary viewpoint, the functions of the ear are to warn of approaching danger, sensitivity and direction finding being paramount. And for speech, In speech perception, the identification of formants, that is, the bands of harmonics from vocal cord pulse excitation, selectively emphasised by vocal tract resonances, and vowel consonant discriminations, are infinitely more important than any hi-fi parameter. Presumably the whole existence of music as a source of pleasure is an accidental side effect of our remarkable powers of speech perception. How it acts as a direct route to the emotions remains profoundly mysterious. Well, as you may have gathered, I recorded that earlier today, as I wasn't sure that I'd be home in time for producing this program properly. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission, and we're also on YouTube live streaming 720p definition at VK3AML 3 July 2021. That is, you feed the phrase VK3AML 3 July 2021 into Google, and you should find the video stream that relates to this transmission on 147.475. And now we're back on the live camera. Something that I should play, completely unrelated at this point to this discussion of audio distortion, bandwidth, phase relationships and all the rest of it, was somebody who was very dear to a lot of us who are involved with the 160 metre crossband situation and with the 2 metre transmissions on Saturday, and that is the late Lionel Curling VK3 November Mike, who was a good friend of mine. One of the people who actually made sure that I got my ham license and produced programs such as the one you're listening to at the moment. Lionel was a conundrum. He was born in Britain, came out to Australia at the age of, I think, 5 in 1956, and lost his father, unfortunately, at about the age of 8. So he was brought up by his mother and was largely self-taught, largely self-disciplined, or I should say self-undisciplined. He was brought up in the Brougham Street, Box Hill area, at a time when Box Hill was very Anglo-Saxon, and that's a long time ago, and developed an interest in amateur radio very early on. I met him in about 1973 in the shack of the late Tony Sanderson, VK3AML, of which we've seen a couple of photographs earlier in this YouTube live stream. Lionel did not look after himself. He was a mixture of the best travelled person I had ever met. He did the Trans-Siberian Railway during the period of communist domination of USSR, which was no mean feat. He travelled America 6 or 7 times, Europe about an equivalent number of times. He read more books, both on electronics and on philosophy, than anyone I knew. Yet you would see him with a dirty t-shirt, a pair of jeans with holes in the knees, and a rope holding them up at the waist, and thongs, and that at formal meetings. You never knew what to make of Lionel. But he had a very good heart. He encouraged amateur radio, and towards the end of his life, amateur radio became his life. Lionel died 10 years ago this weekend. My friend Steve Langley and I were the last people to see him alive. We went in the evening he had a stroke at the Box Hill Hospital. He was battling for his life. He didn't live through that night. But just by chance, I recorded Lionel's last transmission on 160 metres, a band that he particularly was enthusiastic about, some 10 days earlier, from his pad at Vermont South, which was the Vermont South Caravan Park. And while this can be it's a little bit, what we say, it gets into the nitty-gritty a little bit. This is typical of Lionel. So I'm playing this as a 10th anniversary memorial to the late Lionel 3NM. God bless you wherever you are.
VK3NM. Okay, can you, if you can you do me a copy? I would like to watch that. Yeah, well, good morning all. My voice is probably still not quite 100%. I'm definitely not 100%. It's bearable because where I am, where my pad is very, very cold. It's in the, shade of the pine trees. I'm going to see the doctor at 3 o'clock. Well, there's a few issues. I think a few things need to be sorted out, but I think I'm getting over it. I had what I'll call the soft poo syndrome. Well, it doesn't to be better. That's getting better. But I went through about 4 rolls of toilet paper in a day. So, but I won't go into the details. Too much information. But it's just been so cold. In fact, I reckoned, this year the winter was just bitterly cold. I haven't been able to do my skill crossing supervisor. I've got to give the City of Knox a medical certificate to try and work out how long I am going to be off. So that's going to be part of my discussion with the doctor today. Yeah, in the future winters, what I am going to do, I'm even saving up now. I am going to spend, well, if I'm still doing skill crossing supervising in 12 months' time, during the skill holidays, or one of the skill holidays, I'm going to head off to Singapore or Bangkok or one of those places. If I'm not doing any work, I will probably try and stay away for a little bit longer. And another part of the winter next year, yeah, I've decided I'm going to make arrangements to stay with a friend of mine up in Maryborough, Queensland. Yeah, so from now on, after this winter, I'm going to try and reduce my stay in the Melbourne winter as much as I can, until, however, I have put in for a government housing, a flat, which would be quite easy to heat up. So that's my plans anyway. Otherwise, I suppose I'm going to be a beach bum, up at near the Cape York Peninsula. So, but anyway, we'll have to sort of see what happens. But by God, I don't know how you guys, I don't know what you guys thought of this winter, but it was a bug. And we've still got more to come, unfortunately. Okay. I'm not feeling too bad today, but still I'm not warm. But at least it's bearable to come to the 706 anyway. Righto. I'm not too sure who I put it to, so whoever to take, please take it. VK3NM. Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit late. I was a little bit slow. Yeah, okay, VK3XU in the group. VK3NM. Oh, just by the heater actually. Listening on the baby alarm. Yeah, oh, thanks, and Drew, yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll try and make the next club meeting. Yeah, and okay, yeah, quite interesting comments all around. And g'day Adam and others Mr. Anthony's house. Yeah, I must pop up and pick up that little bit of scrap metal you got. You got a little bit to pick up from another fellow, and Ray said he might have a fridge sometime in the future, and a couple of things at John DQ's. John, I was wondering, after the session, can I catch up with you on Skype? Just something interesting I received in the mail this morning. I've never done any welding. I've done a little bit of de-welding some years ago. That's my only experience I've had with a welding rod. But yeah, I imagine it would be an art anyway to do it, do the job properly. What else? Good morning to Chris, and quite interesting, receiving your emails, with the different, various signals reports. So I don't think there's anything to report at this stage. So anyway, I'll see how I feel on Tuesday, and I might run the net anyway on Tuesday. Depends on what the weather and how I feel, and how cold the joint gets. So with that, I'll say cheers, and back to you, Eric. VK3AX and the group VK3NM.
The late VK3NM, Lionel Curling, recorded exactly 10 years ago. His last transmission on 160 metres, a band which, along with 6 metres, he loved to work on, because both were challenging. 6 metres in propagation and 160 metres in actually getting an antenna of such a size that you could put a signal out readily. Fortunately, his pad was very close to a grove of very high pine trees next to what used to be the Wanturna drive-in, so he had a reasonable signal to me in Surrey Hills, which you could hear. I recorded off air I think it was 1840 kilohertz at that stage. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night transmission. I'll get back a little bit to the audio side to take us up to 11 o'clock and a bit of a callback. One of the most respected people in communications audio is Bob Heil. He's an amateur in USA, runs Heil Electronics. They sell microphones, they sell mixers, they sell peak limiters, and Bob Heil really has his finger on the pulse of how to get the best out of ham radio articulation, how to best use equalizers for different types of voice, which microphones are appropriate to which particular situations. Anyway, Bob Heil recently gave a talk on articulation. Dr. Bob Heil, and his call sign is, just hang on a sec, I'll bring it up, K9IED is his call sign. So here is Bob Heil being introduced at a convention about 2 years ago, talking about articulation in receiving systems, not transmitting systems. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with a regular Saturday night test transmission. We'll be opening up for an amateur radio callback on 147.475 out of that transmitter, if you can see me on the web stream. And the web stream you can find by Googling VK3AML 3 July 2021. That's Google VK3AML 3 July 2021. And if you're having any trouble with an audio stream on radio, or if you're in a bad position to receive, that might be your better option to look in on internet. For the moment, here's Bob Heil.
Well, I first met Bob last century. I've known him since last century, so that's a long time. And I don't really remember much about it. But I met him somewhere around 1970. I didn't know who Bob was. He was just this guy that came around and fixed things, because part of my act at the time as a musician was to break everything. Basically, we weren't very good. So somebody counted off, and then when everything on stage was broken, we were done with the concert. And that was that's the way we worked. And then Bob would just come and fix it all. And he fixed a bunch of stuff. And sometime after that, we both discovered that we loved ham radio. And I've known Bob at least 35 years, something like that. And he's nuts. I can tell you that much. There's no doubt about that. But he's good nuts. He is. He's a mad scientist. Anyway, hope you enjoy the show. And great to be here. I'll see you on the air. And here is Bob Heil.
Yay. My good friend Joe. I do a lot of organ concerts. I mean, I think most of you know that that's what I do. Been doing it since I was 12 and professionally since I was 14. And when I play any concerts on the West Coast and he's not out on a stage somewhere, he wants to come and introduce me, and we always have fun doing it. And I thought you guys and gals would enjoy seeing our good buddy ACU. What we want to do today is talk about really articulation. I'm probably one of the only guys in the industry of ham radio that you ever hear the word articulation. And it really bugs me because I listen to signals on the air and they're absolutely terrible. And it's all because they haven't really learned some of the cool things that they should know. And I always say it should be question number 2. Let's start that PowerPoint. And okay, where are we at here? This little dude, right? Yeah, right, gotcha. Okay, I'll trade you places. This is how I started. I still have it. I'm on the air every morning when I'm down in my Pleasant Hope home, and my beloved Harvey Wells, and it's still running. David, are you here? Yeah, still has the original 1956 tubes. But there's a reason. I have a Variac. Oh, serious. The power switch is always on my vintage console, and all I do, I have a digital meter to tell me, is that okay to say digital? Can I say that? A digital meter to tell me the voltage, and I run it up to about 108 to 110. That's it, and that's why I think all of this stuff has worked so long. The problem we have today is all of the vintage gear uses high impedance microphones. And if you're not going to use the crystal microphones, then you're kind of out of luck. But there are advantages to that, but there are also salvations to it. One of the reasons we use crystal microphones, they were designed in the 1930s by a company called Brush. And there was a huge fight between Brush and a Static. And finally, a Static won, and they of course, build many of the D104 type things. But look at that register. My goodness, it's very peaky in the mid-range. And so for all of the guys say, I gotta have it flat. It's gotta be flat. No, it doesn't. No way. And we're gonna learn. Why would you have such a silly-looking response? Well, it certainly isn't flat. And as many of you, I didn't understand this until one day my phone rang. That you, Heil? And I said, yes, sir. Who's it? This is Klipsch. I'm going this. Paul Klipsch? This is God on the other end of this phone. How many people know of Paul Klipsch? He was the father of the folded horn, actually the movement of hi-fi. That was the guy. And he said, you got a cornfield I can come and crash in? He was a crusty old guy. I said, no, but we have an airport about 8 miles south. Well, I'll be there. You got a 10,000 watt PA? And I said, yes, sir, I got a couple of them. I want to come and see it. I figured, this is going to be interesting. He's going to cut me off at the knees and feed it back to me. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. Because what happened is I started learning things that day and the following day. He was the father of the folded horn. This was in his laboratory. It's a plexiglass speaker box, but what you don't see is the last 8 foot of it. 4 foot on this side and 4 on that side, which is your room. This fits in the corner, and your room is actually the last of the 16 foot of that horn. Anybody ever heard or experienced a K-horn? Am I kidding you? There is nothing like it. And it's an experience, right? I mean, it's a religious experience. I know you say, that's another damn speaker. No, it's not. Because your room is actually this part of the speaker. This guy was really something, and I was so blessed. He put me in his airplane and flew me back to Hope, Arkansas. He wanted to know about some of this. He wanted to know who in the world would do this. Well, I was very fortunate. One day I rolled through the Fox Theater parking lot, and they had a couple of the big bins. They were throwing them away. And I asked the stage manager, I said, can I have them? Yeah, I said, you know, hams don't throw anything away. So I started the whole little scene with that. Paul guided me to the studies of Bell Labs. How many here have done the studies? How many? See, that is sacrilegious. It should have been question 2 or 3 on our amateur radio test. Because what is one of the #1 things about ham radio? It's listening. Well, it's all right there. Bell Labs, it was an idea factory of the 20s. And it was a constellation of American Telephone Telegraph, AT&T, and Western Electric. And they manufactured under their arm called Bell System, and they did a lot of things. They had check this out, 4,000 scientists and engineers. And they were assigned to this newly created Bell Telephone Labs. They were dedicated in researching how our ears worked. Why? When they set up the first telephone system, they started in New York. Now think about this. They ran 2 wires from there to California. And about every 50 miles, they would have a relay station. They kept the voltage up. They kept the frequency up. And when they got all out to the West Coast and turned on the phone system,
this is what they heard. What in the world happened to all the voltages are right? All the frequencies right? What happened? So they put Dr. Fletcher and they put Dr. Munson on the case. What did they find out? They discovered our ears have a big problem. We certainly do not hear flat. And so, what's the deal? There's one other thing about this. You will notice that the louder we listen, the flatter it is. So don't go gripe at the kids for listening to loud music. They want to hear it all. They want to hear the cymbals, they want to hear the vocals, they want to hear the bass. It's one of the reasons. But when we're listening down here at 30 or 40, look at that. So if the systems you listen to at these levels, if those systems are not equalized, we're in trouble. We certainly can't do it flat. It just can't happen because you just heard it flat. So what we have to do is pay attention. We have to do a complete redesign. We did it on our sound system, and it was really something. We had a 15 to 20,000 watt system. We had 4 of them. And after I redid them and took Paul's advice and his schooling, it came to about 10,000 watts. The systems covered the arenas better. They sounded so much better. And we were running much less power. Why? Because we paid attention to what
Bell Labs had taught us. These are some of the systems, just a few. We did several thousand concerts during my career. All of those speakers were built in our plant in Marissa, Illinois. That's all fiberglass. I discovered that wood and metal, they ring, they have resonance to them. Fiberglass doesn't. And Paul thought that was really, really cool, that I wanted to do this. And he helped me do all of the different designs. And we could spend all day. And these are just a few of the people that we did there. And we're still out there. Only in 1980, I got out of the business, and we're just doing microphones for just about all of those people. And it was a great time. Hey, question. Anybody know who that is? You won't. You won't. That was their first tour that we did. We're still doing their things. That happens to be ZZ Top without beards. You look at it again, and you might say, yeah, I see that. You can see the system is all plywood. We didn't even have it covered. It was one of our very first systems. I showed that to Billy. Billy is a wonderful, brainy, just an unbelievable person. He reads a lot, knows a lot about things. I love spending time with him. And I showed him this picture that was given to me by one of the radio stations in St. Louis where that happened. I said, what do you see here? I'm expecting him to say something about the beards. Hey, hey, Heil, you see all those kids out there? Look at all those kids. They're all grandpas and grandmas. We had way too much fun. Let's get back into radio. I thought I'd give you a little running history. If you didn't know some of that, that's just a little piece of it. And in 1980, I got back into it, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What happened to my great Art Collins articulate audio? What happened? Because I kept hearing this stuff that was all mushy and bassy about what you heard a minute ago. Oh, I got my matching microphone on my Keenwood. Really? Matching, huh? Yeah. Well, let me tell you about that matching stuff. I now, in the last 12 years, I work for the companies. ICOM, Yaesu. I was the guy that brought equalizers to ham radio. And I know what's going on the other side. They don't build their microphones. They sort it out to some OEM company, paint it the same color, put the name on it. They fooled you all this time. They'll be matching. Damn right, it's the same color, but it certainly isn't good enough. We took care of what that microphone should be. But I just missed all of this. And there's basically, and I learned this from the Bell Lab studies, I still every once in a while go back and read through some of that and see if I missed something, and I usually have. These are 4 important things about audio, and especially on our ham radio stations. Room echo is a biggie, because we don't have a lot of foam or audio panels. There's all kinds of stuff that we do in the studios for that. We don't have that in ham radio. It's usually.
Well, some of us have cupboards behind us which act as anechoic barriers. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission of technical stuff. This weekend we're doing audio, particularly as regards ham radio and articulation, the aspects of it that you don't normally come across. And the speaker that we're listening to at the moment is Bob Heil of Heil Audio, who will be a name known to many of you. This transmission, this lecture was given in the course of a lecture to engineers in America, many of whom were tied up with amateur radio building design, amateur radio transceiver design, I should say. So let's go back to Bob Heil, and reminding people that at around 11 o'clock I'm going to open up for a callback. You pick the topic. It can be audio, it can be Lionel Curling recollections of silent keys, you name it, I'm open to discussing it. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, back to Bob Heil.
In a back room, and sometimes with your washing machine. That really has a lot to do with it. The frequency response, as you heard, really is important. We'll get into a little more of that. And sound pressure, you saw, if it's louder or lower, it all changes response. So you have to understand that. And the other thing that really disgusts me is distortion. We should outlaw compression. We do not need compression. And if you disagree with me, we're going to have a talk, and you will lose. Because I can prove it. I can prove it. The other thing that really bugs me is how people address a microphone. Is that a chapter in our license manuals? No. Well, it's very important. Because here's some of the deals. If you double the distance of this microphone, you lose 6 dB. It's a little bit tough because you're hearing me acoustically. Listen what happened to my signal. Oh, well, that's no big deal, Heil. Just crank it up. Uh-huh. Then you know what you're going to do. I really can't do it in a room like this. There'd be a lot of feedback. But if you crank up the gain, what happens? Room echo. Like you're in a gymnasium, no matter what your room is. And every time you move that microphone, you just lost 6 dB. 6. We're going to come back to this, and you're going to really, really understand it when we do some of the other things. And what I always tell the things, don't do this. No more of this. I hate desk stands. Why? Because they put them here, and hey, I'm just really damn cool. No, you're not. I can't understand you. I hear the room echo louder than you. You shouldn't be more than 2 inches away from a microphone, no matter who you are, what you got, what you think. We're talking about science. Science. I mean, I just prove it to you. When you back off, you lose dynamic range. You lose transient response. And when you talk to the guys in the morning, Bill will tell you, yeah, he does sound damn fine. Okay, and Bill's going to tell you, Jim's going to tell you. But you don't. How do you know? There's only one way. You listening in a second receiver with headphones. Oh, but I don't sound the same. No, you're not going to sound the same as you hear yourself. But listen to that signal that you're listening to. Then you can adjust things. And we just have to learn how to address a microphone. It's very important. I came off the road in 1980, and I started listening around, and I'm going, what in the world? I hooked up with a guy here in town in Metairie, Buddy Massa. Anybody knew Buddy? Buddy? Nick does, I know that. And I got involved on 40 meters every night, and we got to talking about this. I said, I don't like this audio nonsense. What's going on? And he agreed. He says, it's all these import radios, and these guys using these crummy microphones, and they think it's great because it's matching. So I fixed it. I brought to this industry the first time anybody had ever heard the word equalization on a transmitter. This is a little EQ box I built. I wrote an article. It got the cover award. I didn't even know what a cover award was. I was very honored by that. And we are now able to adjust bass and treble. And so when we plugged in our MC50 and it sounded like that, Bill said it'll sound just fine. Well, good for Bill. However, we're losing all of those beautiful articulate frequencies. We want to bring the mids up. So roll off the low end and bring in the high end. And listen how much easier. Now listen. Listening is a very, very cool thing. It's a mental process. Not physical, mental. I'm going to do this again. And just listen to it. Here we're going to go back flat. There you are, absolutely flat. That's what you have in your transmitters. Well, what happens if we bring in a little bit of treble and roll off a little low end. Even at my low voice, it's so much easier to understand the difference of an F and an S, a P or a B. Only thing I'm touching is the tone control. And you don't have one on your radio unless it's one of the later ones. Then you get the guys that, well, hey, I got a really cool signal, man. I got all this low end. And they get this thing on the air and you can't understand a damn word. Then they're going to tell you, well, your receiver's not wide enough. I got news for you, buddy. If you're wider than 2.9 or 3K, you better not get in my face. Because no one has told them how important it is to get rid of the bass, because that's where all your RF power is. You don't need it. If you get rid of everything under 100, it's going to put it on up to 2.5K region where you really need it. And that is all about equalization. And I was very fortunate that I got people to listen to me. And one of them was Dr. Inouye, who owns ICOM, 1999. He sent me a picture of his station. This is Mr. ICOM. And the picture was one of my gold line microphones and this little guy. And I'm just some little freak sitting in Marissa, Illinois, a little mining town and 2,000 people in southern Illinois. And here's this giant man that had my products. And he said, we got to do something. I'm thinking of a new radio, and I want to put your equalizer in it. I just want to make sure that we do this right. And so I started working with ICOM, everything from the Pro 1 all the way through to the 7300, 7610, has bass and treble, two-band equalization, because Dr. Inouye, he discovered how important it was. And so we have it all happening. But as I say, you want to roll off everything under 100 cycles, because it all happens from 2 to 3K. Because if I take that 2 to 3K out, you're not going to be very pleasant sounding. Okay, so you like your MC50. You think I'm kidding? That's what they sound like. Mine don't sound... Yes, it does. I have hours of recordings. You want me to play them for you. So anyway, it's just, I think you can hear some of the vast differences I can make this with these two buttons. That's it. And so once you get involved in this and you understand what has to happen, you can make your system sound really good. Well, after the equalizer, I'm going, wait a minute. Buddy Massa, W5 VSR, Metairie, Louisiana. He was one of my beta testers for this. He said, hey, Heil, you know, every time we set this thing, it's usually at the same position. Bring up the 2K, roll off the low end. Why don't you build a microphone like that? And so we did. And we built the HC4. Well, we built the HC5 first. Anybody have an HC5? Of course you do. A lot of people do. You have a couple of them. Because they sound good and you don't have to do anything to them. Then, the North California DX Club in 1985, they were using old Supro headsets. Some of them were even duct tape and D104s, and it was crazy. They said, build us a microphone for contesting. And we did. I should have brought one with me, but anyway, that microphone sounds about like this. It's terrible sounding. It's the worst sounding microphone you could ever create. Why would you do that? Because everything I'm sending to you is happening between about 1,000 cycles and about 2.2. That's it. But all my RF power is there. So guess who's going to be on top of the pile? It's going to be that guy. 100,000 or more later, we're still there. And we're still building some of those great, great sounds. I will never, ever not. Right now, anybody have some of these? If you don't, why not? Without a doubt, it is the best headset ever. Why do I say that? Because it's mine? No, it's why I built it. This headset is the only headset that does a lot of things. Number one, I went back to my Paul Klipsch days. I've always wanted to do this, but I'd never had room in a normal headset. We took the speaker outside, just like we do in speaker cabinets, did a free air cone resonance of that speaker. Then we treat the inside where it's mounted to correspond with that, so that the speaker doesn't move. There's no distortion. And that's what we're after, is getting rid of distortion. This is the only headset. I know there are copies out there, but they're just copies. The people building are not into audio. They have never met Paul Klipsch. They haven't read the Bell Lab reports. I know, because I've talked to my competition. They don't even know how to wire a damn connector. I mean, it really gets sickening to me. And they're trying to put themselves to you as they're some kind of genius. No, they're not. The other thing I have on here is I have a phase control. What? A phase reversal? What in the world is that about? It's the only headset in the world, and all of ours do have phase reversal. Anybody here you have our headsets and understand this? It's incredible. And you're going to say, what do you do with that? Well, when you reverse the phase, you can shift things around. You get in a pile up, and you hear this little bitty weakie back here. You reverse the phase, he comes up front, and the rest go behind. You actually, acoustically, can move signals in your head with that headset. No other person has ever done that. And I don't know why. I'm not an engineer. I'm just a damn organ player. But I love ham radio a lot. Pro 7, it's really incredible. Check it out. But we took advantage of this. That, by the way, is the newest headset, or the newest microphone. It's the HC7. It's the same thing. We just call it a different number.
This is VK3AML. You've been listening to Bob Heil of Heil Audio talking about articulation and transmission of articulate speech by ham radio, of which he's an enthusiast. Bob Heil started, just hang on a sec, my level was vastly too high. Bob Heil started as a theatre organist, would you believe, in the 1950s, and later found that he was in demand for designing audio systems, transducers, amplifiers. He got into it in a big way on the ground floor, met the pioneers, Paul Klipsch, G.A. Briggs, all the rest of them. And these days is making equipment for communications as well as for the music industry, which he does very well. At a premium price, I might add. There are some places now that make almost the equivalent Behringer, I think you could almost say, as an equivalent of some of the Heil material, but not all of it. So let's go back to Bob Heil for the next 15 minutes until 11 p.m, at which time I'll open it up on 147.475 for callbacks. And thank you to VK3AF in Essendon for coming up on the internet stream, as well as Peter Marks, friend of mine from, 40 years ago. Peter Marks, who was for many years in Sydney, has now moved back to Melbourne, and we hope we haven't lost him as a voice on the ABC reviewing science and technology. A very good broadcaster. If you want to look in on this transmission, not that you'll see a great deal, except an old bloke with a bald head in a ham radio shack, you can dial VK3AML 3 July 2021. That is Google VK3AML 3 July 2021. And if you have problems with receiving 2 meters where you are, if you want better audio, or if you're outside the Melbourne VHF range completely, this would be your alternative. So Google the phrase VK3AML 3 July 2021 and you should be able to see as well as hear us in full Phi. Mono though. Back to Bob Heil, audio expert.
But all of our microphones have this rich mid-range in them, even the broadcast microphones. Sirius Radio just tossed all of their RE20s and bought 350 PR40s. Now, it was a struggle. The first few years we had it out, the broadcast, that thing ain't good. He's just a ham radio op. That's just one of his ham mics. No, it's not. No. I do have a little more brain than just this much here. I knew we needed more, and so I did. What's really cool about it is we worked on patterns. And very few microphones in the ham radio market are talking about this. They're just cheap little Chinese, and yes, they are Chinese elements, and it's really sad. But they're matching. I mean, what the heck? But we have a pattern. And all of them do this. If you're watching me, I'm 90 degrees off. If this was anybody else's microphone, you'd be losing a lot. But as I move a whole 180 degrees, it stays with me. That was number one. Most of these designs, when I wanted to get in the pro industry, was done on a kitchen table in Studio City with Joe Walsh. Joe and I are very, very good friends. We have been for years. Actually, the thing you saw was 10 years ago. We're over 45 years now. And he said, you got to build me a microphone for the stage. I said, well, you got your ball microphone. Yeah, but it's no good. I said, what do you mean? Everybody uses it. He takes me downstairs, grabs my ham radio gold line, plugs it in, and it outperforms an SM58. I was really surprised because I wasn't stupid enough to do that, but I should have. So he said, let's work on this. You got to do this. And he said, the patterns are great. So then he said, when I'd come through town and you had that big antenna, he said, you turned that antenna around, I couldn't hear you. How'd you do that? I said, well, it's all about phasing. Really? Well, why don't you apply that to the microphone? Then I won't pick up my monitors and I won't pick up that guy and I'll just hear me. I said, well, we can do that. We can do a pattern just like we need, whatever you want. If you haven't had fun yet, or you haven't learned anything yet, get set. You will never, mark my word, never forget the next 5 minutes, because I don't think anyone's ever helped you learn about this stuff. Let me turn this off. Ears off when I get all this going. Okay, now let's get the other one. Now what's interesting is their microphones are the same. Yeah, I know they're different colors. Okay, I have to get all this exactly right because this is really a scientific project. This isn't just some little passing fancy thing. It's the real deal. Okay, we have two microphones and you will agree they're exactly alike. It's a microphone that I actually built first for Paul Rogers. Anybody know who Paul Rogers is? Bad Company back in the day. What are we going to learn here? First of all, this microphone is very peaky. He wanted something with not a lot of low end. It had a nice balance to it. But we didn't want all that stupid low, and he didn't have to tell the sound man to adjust 2.5. It's already done. You are running 500 watts, and you're not getting through the pile-ups with your matching microphone. And so you're going to go spend some money and buy a kilowatt. Okay? How many decibels are you going to provide more? 3. Do you really know how loud 3 dB is? Has anybody ever set you down to let you hear what 3 dB is? You might want to cover up your ears as he's doing. I told you you're not going to forget. And this is not a magic act. This is a science project. This is the honest to God truth. When you double your power, you gain 3 dB. When I talk into both of these microphones, you can see my meter. It will go up 3 dB. So here we go. 1, 2, 3. Something's wrong. Let's do it again. Remember what I talked about listening? Listening is it's a mental process. It really is. Everybody just hears. Very few people I meet really hear. They listen, they just hear. Okay, play with me. Do this. Close your eyes. I mean, get in this mode to really, you got to really listen because we're going to double our power. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to take it away. 1, 2, 3. You can't hear it because the human being can't detect 3 decibel. Unless we'd be in an echo chamber and some really crazy laboratory project, and it wouldn't do you any good because it's not going to happen in your ham station. That's 3 dB. Now wait a minute. It's going to cost you $1,000 to double your power, right? Maybe more. Let me tell you what to do. Take the $1,000, give it to your wife to buy more shoes and purses, and you're going to be King Tut. But you didn't help your signal. But I can get you 10 dB just by adjusting your equalizer and using the right microphone. Whoa, that'd be pretty cool, wouldn't it? Well, it's true. You can do it. That's really where I was not going with this. I just do it because it's fun. Here's where I was headed, but I like to do that because most people don't know how loud 3 dB isn't. I have this neat little plug. And I'm going to plug it in here. And then we're going to plug this in here. Big deal. Okay. They sure work fine. There's only one problem. A situation. That little plug is out of phase. David was telling you about what you can do with in and out phase, right? Well, you're about to hear and learn a whole lot about how it really takes part in your ham radio station. Because when I bring both of these microphones together, you know what happens? Nothing. The damn bomb can go off and you're not going to hear it. Oh, they still work. But not together. This diaphragm is going that way and this one's going this way. Oh my God. How much time have I got? Have I got 3 hours? It's my favorite subject. It's my favorite subject. Think about it. How many of you have a Yagi? Do you really know what Dr. Yagi did when he designed it? Do you really know how it was designed? Think about it. You have a driven element. He figured this all out before computers. David will like that. He figured out if he could go so far in the boom out and make the director so long, he could get a little gain. If he could put one behind, little long, this and he turned it to California. Oh, they're gone. Hello, goodbye. Because it's out of phase. And that's what I said. I need about 3 hours. You have a noise blanker. You have a notch filter. You got some idiot that's right beside you. How does that work? It takes its signal and puts it out of phase. Goodbye, we'll see you later. On and on. Noise canceling headsets. How do they work? Being out of phase. How can I move things around? Because I can change the phasing. There is so much to do in ham radio about phasing, and damn it, I don't hear it, I don't read it. It's just stupid, because these are things that really make your signal come or go if you apply it.
Bob Heil, audio expert and the head of Heil Electronics in America, one of his lectures on articulation. As ham radio progresses towards digital means of communication, increasingly computers are connected to ham radio outfits to do things that neither a ham radio or a computer could do unless they're connected together. And there is so much in the connection of a ham radio to a computer that needs study that is just not available in the average textbook. One of the things is that the earth, the mains earth of your computer, needs to be separated from the mains earth, or even the normal earth of your radio. Otherwise you may get a circulating earth loop. 50 hertz goes up your power cord into your computer. The earth of your audio lead goes through to the radio has a separate earth, it goes down into the earth and forms a big loop into which 50 hertz or 100 hertz is induced. And the way you can eliminate that is with one of these. I'm actually holding on the YouTube video stream a 1-to-1 coupling transformer, 600 ohms to 600 ohms with a Faraday shield in the middle between the two windings. And this allows you to pass 25 hertz to 15 kilohertz, the full audio bandwidth, not that you'll be using more than a fraction of that for ham radio, but because the audio is put in on one winding and taken out on the other winding, there is no continuous earth connection between the input and the output, and that allows you to break the earth loop that could be formed between the computer, the radio, and the earth. And so, using a transformer and balancing the audio lines in your Radio Shack can make all the difference when you're running any digital mode, FT8, scan TV, anything really, including what we're doing tonight. I'm actually taking the output of my computer sound card, which is running my voice onto the internet, and I'm running my transmitter off the sound card in the computer, and the two are isolated. The computer is isolated from the radio by one of these coupling transformers. Very valuable. Only cost you about $5 second hand at a ham fest, but they're worth their weight in gold. And increasingly, as computers are associated with radios, for whatever, for receiving, for decoding CW, radio teletype, radio facsimile weather fax from national broadcast stations on HF, you'll need to learn about computer to radio interfacing. Well, it's 10:58 p.m. and in approximately 2 minutes I'll be opening up on 147.475 for anybody who'd like to have a chat. I hope I've offended nobody in the statements that have been made in tonight's transmission. I hope I've not crossed any copyright boundaries. I don't think I have. The Bob Heil transmission, lecture, was freely available openly on internet, and if you weren't getting it here, you could get it from the original source, which is freely available. In future weeks I'll run other Bob Heil lectures. He's a very interesting person to talk to. I don't agree with everything that he says. I do agree with most things that he says. For example, I don't think there's any need to have a low frequency cutoff. To recover the lower frequencies of the human voice, a low frequency roll-off will do, which you can then correct for in receiving. And one of the most interesting things that I possibly could lecture on as a future Saturday night subject is the usage of audio spectral analysis, the so-called waterfall graph, to make sure that all of the frequencies that your voice contains are an equal level above the noise floor. To recover any signal from noise, basically your signal has to be above the noise floor. And if you can make all of the audio in your voice frequencies an equal amount above the noise floor, you're using your voice most effectively against noise. And the key to that, as Bob Heil has hinted, is equalisation. Something that's done by very few amateurs, surprisingly, in spite of the fact that they've spent $1,000, sometimes $5,000 on their ham radio rig. And one of the major points I think that Bob Heil made in that speech was that 3 dB is a barely perceptible amount of change to the human ear or to the noise floor. So what about all these people who are screaming for the increase of our maximum legal power on HF from 400 watts to 1,000? It's barely 3 dB. Nobody will hear the difference. Yet people are prepared to pay huge amounts of money for saying it's a kilowatt. Well, pardon me. Okay, I'll get off the soapbox. Now I'll open it up, hopefully, for discussions on the radio. I'll fade up the radio input channel and get myself a notebook here. Would be very embarrassing if nobody comes back to me, but I see that there are about a dozen people on the YouTube stream at the moment. So, putting aside the potato chips and the coffee, this is VK3AML putting out a CQ call on 147.475, and does anybody want to come back for a QSO? VK3AML standing by.
And VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
I got VK3CG. Didn't get the other station there. Who was that?
3ACZ.
Oh, okay. Hello, Peter. VK3ACZ. Have we got any other breakers? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, just standing by for any calls on 147.475. There is somebody there, but they're so low down that I couldn't hear them. Could you hear anything, Peter? VK3ACZ to start, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group from VK3ACZ. No, I couldn't hear anybody else except David. Good evening, David, and good evening to you, Chris. Another interesting, provocative broadcast, provocative in a good way. The subject of audio is certainly a controversial one in that everybody has a different idea of what meets their ears. Sometimes I despair sometimes when I hear people asking for audio reports and being told that they need to add more compression or drop off compression or something like that when it sounds perfect to my ears. And I'm reminded of my favourite net controller on the ANSA net, Sundays VK4JT, Mike, lovely guy. He's got a very, very punchy new audio, and it just doesn't sound right because I'm so used to the old way. But it'll get through. It'll get through in tough conditions, and there you go. But anyway, it was interesting. I liked his style. He had a way of really catching your attention and stopping you from wandering. The other thing I want to say straight off the top, Chris, is how inspired I was by listening to Lionel. I think that it's scary in a sense, because you wouldn't have known when you recorded it that that was his last transmission. And the fact that you cared to keep it, that you cared to broadcast it, helps us remember him, and people who didn't know him get to hear him. And it was just wonderful. I was really touched by your little tribute to him there, and thank you for it. Anyway, that's enough to get the ball rolling. Another great broadcast, as I said, VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
VK3ACZ and group now, VK3AML. Lionel, it was, who's the person responsible for getting me onto ham radio, really. I'd been a pirate on 160 metres in 1969. I then looked into getting the licence. I always saw the CW requirement as obsolete. Couldn't see the point of it. After shilly-shallying around being a member of the WIA Broadcast Committee in the mid-70s, and then later in the early 80s going into the WIA to do the Morse course with the late, I'll think of his name, VK3 BZC, I'm just trying to think of his name, Ron, forgotten, but he had a Morse course going at WIA. I got right through the course. I had my Morse up to about 7 or 8 words a minute, was about to do the exam, and then was called interstate to do a job for the National Film and Sound Archive in Canberra, and could not go ahead with the exam. So for yet another 10 or 20 years, I was put off getting a licence, because anytime I'd go round to my friend Tony 3AML's place, he was quite prepared to put me on the air and we'd have discussions there. But Tony died in June 2006, almost exactly 15 years ago. And then I realised if I didn't get the licence then, I was never going to be on the air again, and I'd lose contact with a lot of people. And Lionel knew me well then. I'd met Lionel in Tony Sanderson's Radio Shack back in the early 70s. Lionel said to me, with your technical knowledge, you should walk through it, and all you need is a bit of brushing up in theory. He said, here's the book on theory, on regs. He said, you should be able to pass the regs because you've been with Tony when he's broken every one of them. Tony was a bit of a lad. That's the old 3AML. And anyway, he arranged one Saturday to come around with what he said was the the novice licence, sat me down for an hour, and while he had a cup of coffee and went out the back and had a cigarette, as was his wont. And I did the exam in around about 20 minutes, and I thought, this is easier than it should be. And as he came back in, I said, I finished, and he laughed, and he said, you're supposed to spend an hour. And he said, I'll just mark this. He went click, 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 click. He said, you got 96%. You know what you've done? You haven't passed the novice. You haven't passed the limited. You haven't passed the F-call. You've passed the advanced. He said, now if you don't come round to the EMDRC where I'm an invigilator and sit for the real exam within a week, I'm going to come round there and kick your ass. So this was about August of 06. Went into the MDRC. I sat for the exam. I was sitting beside John 3DQ when he was doing his advanced. And I got a couple of questions wrong. I think the passing that I did was, instead of 96%, it was something like 90%. But I got there. And Lionel, by twisting my arm and by trickery, was the person who was responsible for getting me through. I was also pushed by Tony Formosa, VK3AAZ, who heard me occasionally on CB radio and was twisting my arm saying, you want to get out of these rat bags, these no-hopers, get together with people who can talk to and have a good talk back. Instead of, fighting each other and wrapping tire levers around each other's head, you should be talking about something technical, and he was right. So Tony 3AAZ and Lionel 3NM were ultimately responsible for getting me on the air. That's the story. That's the true story. Anyway, we'll put it round to Dave. Nice to hear you again, Dave. VK3ECG, with a pause in case anybody else would like to break in. VK3AML.
Yes, VK3AML, the group, VK3 Echo Charlie Golf. I didn't hear anyone, but I didn't hear anyone the first time, Chris, when you said you could hear a weak station. But where I'm located, it can be a bit awkward. There were some odd hills around me, but it goes, I get good signals in some directions, but not at others. Actually, with Steve, I often find great difficulty in getting his 160 transmissions. Actually, you can just about hear them, and they fade in and out a lot. And my antenna is probably not brilliant for top band, but yeah, it doesn't work very well. But there we are, all good signals from you, and of course you too, Peter. And yes, it's interesting, isn't it, though, how one gets involved with radio and things. I mean, I'd always been sort of keen and built sort of crystal sets when I was younger and things like that. And it was actually a school friend of mine whose father was a local vicar, actually, and he was, I think he was G4AM, I think, but he initially gave me some sort of tips and tricks, and then he and his, then I and his son went and did the exam together, and this was the old Sitting Guilds of London radio amateur examination, which was actually a little Sitting Guild certificate. It was a bit like an O-level course paper. In fact, it was very similar to the O-level papers, and had the same grading system for the sort of school exams, and that consisted of yes, you had to get significant marks in the regulations, and then you could choose to do transistors or valve theory for all of your constructions and things like that. I did valves because at the time I understood valves a little bit better than I understood transistors. That's probably true today, actually. But so I did that, and I didn't actually go and do the Morse. So I had a Class B license for a long time in the UK, and then about a year or so before I came to Australia, I thought to myself, look, I want to get my Morse. So I actually went off and did a Morse course run by the local sort of adult education centre. There was a couple of people there, and a few people, some amateurs and some people who were thinking of doing the amateur exams and would want to do the Morse course. So I did that, and I remember taking the exam. It was one Christmas time, and they sent a piece of very complicated medical text to me, which I don't know whether they realised that I was a doctor or not, but they sent this text, which always made life a lot easier for me in the sense that where there was the odd gap, it was quite easy to fill the odd bit in because I could say what the words are, and they were quite complicated. I remember it was something to do with some sort of complicated pulmonary disease process, which was, actually quite straightforward. But there we are, and I managed to transmit reasonably well, so I scraped through. It was a 12 words a minute test in the UK at that time, and that went very well, and had my full license for a while in the UK, which I still have, because they moved to the class licensing system, so there's no fees now for maintaining your amateur license in the UK. So I've still got it. I don't pay. I just about every 3 years I have to tell them I'm still there. But apart from that, that's all you do. And so yeah, and when I arrived here, as I said, I contacted and the group now at the time, but and they offered me a couple of call signs on a reciprocal basis, and ECJ came up. I thought that was entirely typical, so I picked that for no very good reason other than it stood for electrocardiogram to me, and that was about it. But yes, fascinating. Yes, I actually enjoyed listening to Bob Heil on a few things. I've heard him on the Ham Nation podcast in the past, or I haven't listened for a year or two now. But every now and then I used to, and certainly interesting and you know, quite controversial in some of the things he says, but absolutely right in so many of the others. Anyway, back to you, Chris, and hope all is well with you, Peter, as well. So, VK3AML, the group VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
Helps when you switch the mic on, doesn't it? VK3 ECG and group VK3AML. Something that's always I've been curious about, Dave, is what exactly brought you out to Australia? I mean, apart from the sunshine and not living in a place that looks like Coronation Street with Ina Sharples in a hairnet all the time, was there any particular professional thing that brought you out here? VK3 ECG, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3 ECG. Well, it's a slightly long, complicated story, but I had decided to, when I finished all my sort of qualifications and other postgraduate bits and pieces, my wife and I decided we'd go overseas for a few years to get some experience. And I thought, well, why not have a go at some of the forensics things rather than the hospital-based sort of work that I was doing? And I looked at a couple of things that were around, and I went off to do a final exam in London, sort of a postgraduate sort of thing. And while I was there, I met the person who had just taken the job as the new director of the new institute in Melbourne. And one of his colleagues was doing the exam with me, and he said, oh, he's just back in London for some court cases from Melbourne. He set up a new institute there, and I'll give you his number. So he gave me his number. I gave him a ring after I had the Viva part of the exam. He said, I'll come for a cup of coffee. We went to a little cafe in Swiss Cottage or something in London, I think it was, and pretty much at the end of that, he said, well, if you want to come out to Melbourne, that's that'll be fantastic. And I rang my wife. I got home, and she had gone off to camp with a group of, I think, 13 and 14-year-old boys and girls. She was a school teacher, and to Dartmoor. And Dartmoor was absolutely thundering down with rain the whole weekend, and she was sort of up to her ankles and thighs in mud camping with these kids. And I said, we've got an opportunity to go to Australia. She thought that was a fantastic idea, and that's how we got to be here. Back to you, Chris, from VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dave. One of the earliest films that Grierson, I think it was Grierson, was involved with was a film in 1929, a very late silent, called A Cottage on Dartmoor. So I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of the moors and the mists and the bogs. Strikes me as being a horrible place of the type where you'd expect to see the Hound of the Baskervilles, you know, echoing, wet, dank, depressing, somewhat like the Siberian tundra, I should imagine. So it was the depressiveness of Dartmoor that partly brought you to Australia. It's an interesting one. Oh, dear, dear, dear. I'm just curious about this Sitting Guilds of London business. I can't think of any Australian institution or institutions that would have an equivalent. Presumably this is some sort of historical precedent. Not sure. Anyway, round to Peter, 3ACZ. Any news on the Sherbrooke Radio Club, Peter? Is the next meeting going ahead, and do you have a syllabus item? And how is Jim 3AMN going? Is he still up the bush? VK3ACZ and group VK3AML.
VK3AML in the group from VK3ACZ. Jim is back from the bush. In fact, he spent a couple of days in William Angliss Hospital afterwards. He scratched an itch on an ear and picked up a little bit of a skin infection, as you are prone to do occasionally in the bush, and spent a couple of days on an antibiotic trip. But other than that, all raring to go for the meeting on Monday. I don't know about syllabus. I meant to be on the 80-metre net this morning and didn't quite make it to find out all the details. But come one and come all is about all I'll say about that. Something I wanted to say is that I'm just starting to thaw out now. I spent the day out portable just to prove that you don't have to be crazy to be a portable operator, but it helps. Hi. It was as cold as I was buoyed by the fact that the solar flux index is close to 100. We got 50-something sunspots. 15 metres should have some promise, and there's a 15-metre ANZA net on at 1400 local time, 0400 Zulu. And that one turned out to be a bit of a disaster, but I had a wonderful time doing DX. I had a 5x9 both ways with Austria, Spain and Italy, so I wasn't really feeling the cold while all that was happening, but the rest of the time, oh my goodness, it hailed on me. It actually hailed on me, and I'd forgotten how much hail actually stings when it hits you, especially on the back of the neck. But so long as the radio gear was kept warm and dry, that was the main thing. And so that's what I've been doing today. And boy, I forgot how cold it really can get when your hands and feet are suffering. And that's what Jim would have been doing when he was up the bush. I think they came back early. They left on the Tuesday and were back by the Saturday from their last trip up to Grand Picnic Ground, which was somewhere outside Dargo. But anyway, I don't believe they're going there next time. It'll be somewhere. Where was it? Somewhere north of Marysville, I think, is the next plan they've got. But anyway, you'll hear all about that on Monday, presuming you're able to come along, Chris. Hope you can. Oh, and by the way, I want to say a big hello to the Attorney General's Department, who I know are listening to these broadcasts, because when you commented something to do with having a file with a certain department, and I made a few comments, I got a kick in the backside for mine. So even though I didn't reveal the identity of the person, but anyway, your broadcasters received far and wide, I will say, from that tongue-in-cheek, and hopefully I haven't stretched the bounds too far with that one. Back to you, Chris, VK3AML from VK3ACZ.
Oh, brother. Looks like I put my foot in it again. VK3ACZ, VK3AML, and I see it's Monday evening. Okay. I'm sure that my ASIO record goes no further than a mention of the fact that I ran the Nostalgia program and Amateur Radio News, the slightly souped-up version of the WIA news broadcast on 3CR for 1 year from the middle of 1976 to the middle of 1977. If they want to imagine me into some surreptitious left-wing communist subversion, well, let them think about it, but, it was rather hard to do when I was living at home with my parents and not much income. In 1976, 45 years ago. Interesting. And I'm sorry to hear about Jim with the William Angliss. I can sympathise. About 6 months, or more than that, 8 months ago, I got itchy ankles from wearing a particularly nastily elastic-topped sock, which ring-barked my right ankle. And if you wear that for 12 hours, it puts a deep impression if it's got very strong elastic. It was a cheapy sock I bought from a pop-up shop at the local supermarket. I am coming to a point with this, incidentally. Anyway, you can imagine I took the sock off and I scratched and scratched and scratched around where the depression was, where the sock elastic had been. The next morning I had some nasty scratches breaking the skin. About 3 days later they went bright red. The next thing I knew, I had a leg ulcer. And this thing took, even with antibiotics and bandaging, and a regular application of some sort of a steroid cream, it took something like 3 months to get that damn thing to heal. Of course, I'm 67. The healing process takes a bit longer at my age. But I actually had that ulcer on my leg when we went to Deal Island, and I was worried that there, beyond the reach of easy medical help, if anything had taken a turn for the worse, I wouldn't have been able to walk even to the boat to take me off Deal Island. So it was a worry. And I think from what I've heard, that people that suffer from varicose veins, as I do, tend to develop leg ulcers in later life. So maybe this is a sample of the nasties yet to come. But I can understand how Jim, being out in the bush, the number of microbes that you'd come across at a camping site would be many and varied, and probably those that the body had never struck before or developed a resistance to. So it's one of the major dangers of doing that sort of stuff when you're of advanced age, as Jim and I are. And Terry VK3FTJS has just made a comment about that ASIO comment. Look out, Chris, you've got another record. And he's laughing. Oh dear, I should go for the big one, comrade. Dear, oh dear. Just before we go around back to Dave again, it's tomorrow night, Monday night, and the venue is, Peter?
Yeah, the Baronia Wesleyan Methodist Church, Pine Crescent, Baronia. And by the way, about that, the Attorney General's Department, you weren't in the poo. I potentially could have been. I did not name anybody and never would. Say that for the record, but somebody let me know they weren't very impressed and reminded me not to go where, as I said, I will not go. But anyway, I've had difficulties with that particular person in the last couple of days, and yeah, well, what I'd like to say is I can't say. They're difficult. I think they're losing the plot, but that's another story. Already said too much. Back to you, Chris.
Look, it doesn't worry me. There are so many nutters around who fantasize into all sorts of threats in places that they're not, and then when the real threats come from people who really are threatening, those are the last people that those people suspect. But interesting nonetheless. And speaking of that, Dave, with your forensic work, you must come across a lot of politically sensitive situations, particularly in assessing forensic jobs. I don't know whether you'd want to talk about that too much on the air, but it's an interesting aspect of your work, according to Steve 3SL, who I speak to on a fairly constant basis. One thing I wasn't able to do enough of tonight, incidentally, to bring myself into full accord with the regulations, was to give out my call sign as often as I would have liked. But as an explanation, we had a family gathering for the 80th birthday of my wife's eldest brother in South Melbourne, and it was a dinner. And unfortunately, the Greek restaurant that we were at in Park Street, South Melbourne, had overbooked their interior accommodations, and so the whole 13 of us people from the family were forced out into a sort of a plastic tent on the sidewalk in South Melbourne, with the external temperature at about 1.5 degrees C. They had those external flame things in a vertical plastic or glass cylinder going, but they didn't give out so much heat. So the elder members who were there during the dinner had to depart fairly early. But in preparation for that, as some people might have noticed, I recorded video of the first half hour of tonight's transmission, and ran it by playing the video onto my desktop and then streaming the desktop through OBS software. And the result of that was that there was some jerkiness of motion in the video, but I think the audio was okay. Not that people would have noticed too much. So I'm gradually learning the ropes of this OBS software and the way to insert stills, as some of you may have seen that we did. Photographs of the late Tony Sanderson, photographs of G.A. Briggs from the 1950s, and photographs of Douglas Self, who I think is one of the most straight-talking audio engineers of the present generation. He's prepared to say that the enthusiasm for vinyl and for tubes and for speaker cables that cost $3,000 is all a load of bunkum, and I tend to agree with him. Anyway, I wonder if you've ever struck that, Dave, the upper end of the domestic audio market demanding cables that have been stroked by magnets in the right direction to encourage the flow of electrons from amplifier to speaker rather than back again. VK3 ECG and the group VK3AML.
Yes, VK3AML and group VK3 Echo Charlie Golf. Yes, I mean, the speaker cables are tough enough, but when people want you to spend sort of $300 or $400 for a mains cable, going from the socket in the wall to your amplifier or whatever, to say nothing of the fact that once you go beyond the wall, of course, it's back to the routine. Supply always was pretty amazing. I mean, apart from the odd, in days when I lived in cities and had the old taxi systems where they used to come through your speakers cables occasionally, but nothing that a small ferrite toroid couldn't fix and things like that. But no, it's absolutely incredible. I mean, I've got a mixture of weird stuff here, some valve amps, some transistor amps and bits and pieces I picked up over the years. And I was very fortunate when I was a student to find two quad 2 valve amplifier, two of those little monoblocks, in a little second-hand shop at a really very low price. And I've had them ever since, and they've had little repairs every now and then and bits and pieces, but they work very nicely. But I've also had plenty of nice transistor amps as well. So it's horses are courses, and you put something together for the sound you want, basically, is the way I look at it. Now, I looked up the, you talk about the City and Guilds exam, the old RAE, the Radio Amateurs Examination in the UK. The City and Guilds of London Institute still exists, and it really is sort of like a trade, about linked back to originally to the City and Guilds of London, which of course were the trade organisations for all of the different trades originally, going back to medieval times, in fact. But they've obviously modernised considerably since then, thank goodness. But you can go to the website for City and Guilds of London, and they do a lot of the trade examinations, engineering, electric, well, all kinds of things, actually. They no longer do the amateur radio exam, but I've managed to find, looking around, 1976 City and Guilds of London Institute exam for the amateur radio certificate, and it has two parts, part 1 and part 2. Part 1's 15 marks and part 2, each question is 10 marks. You had to answer both questions in part 1, which was the regulations and organisational stuff, and then in part 2 you had to answer, I think, 6 questions out of about, looks like about 8 questions. So, but it's quite an interesting exam, really. So the regulations one was straightforward, really, but it also had, it was regulations and interference. So there's a question like, what are key clicks in the radio transmission? What effects may they have on other services and stations? And how can they be minimised is one of the questions. And then in the part 2, which was the general electronics, I suppose, and radio, some of them are theoretical. What is capacitance? And then it gives you a little problem about 12 microfarads catching power, 1 to 6 microfarads, what's the total capacitance, and then what would it be if they were in series, and so on. And then they show you a circuit diagram for a low power transmitter for the 144 to 146 band. And then they say at what frequency, crystal frequency, could the oscillator operate, and how is this converted? What methods of emission are available in this circuit diagram? What method of speech modulation is employed? So you have to actually analyze the circuit diagram, and then you have to draw a block diagram of a single sideband suppressed carrier transmitter, and what is meant by skip distance, what is describe the part played by the ionosphere in this phenomenon, describe one aerial system, a halfway dipole, a halfway folded dipole, a Zeppelin, loaded whip, describe the polar diagram of the aerial chosen and state its advantages and disadvantages. So it was quite a sort of interesting examination, really, and I don't think I did terribly well on it when I was only 14, but it was 14 or 15 or something. But yeah, it certainly, you had to read up quite generally around the subject of electronics, and there was no multi-choice. These are all right essays or short answers. So quite an interesting exam, really. But yeah, there we are. So yeah, I had a look at some of the OBS software. I haven't really explored it yet, but I'm going to trying to do some podcasts and things like that in due course, and particularly around that on that more forensic topic, actually, because I thought that could be quite interesting. There's so many of these things around, though, these days, though not many people with the sort of more technical background doing them. There's mostly journalists and things like that. So I'll have a go at it sometime and have a little play with OBS and see what's possible. I've got involved occasionally with podcasts, quite a few ABC podcasts I've been involved with one way or another, and I did an interview for one, I think, a couple of weeks ago, which is about to come out, so that'll be another interesting thing. But there's a lot more to it than just sitting in front of a microphone, as you well know. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML and the group, VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
Have we got any other breakers while I think of it? VK3AML. No, only the two this week. I'm very glad to have the two of you there. Interesting. Very interested to hear that it was the 144 to 146 meg band in UK. So it's not 146 to 148. I wonder what's occupying the high end of 2 meters that we use. In some ways, Britain doesn't have it as good as we have in terms of bandwidth, but in others it does. I know that on 80 metres, I think 80 metres in Britain extends from 3.5 almost to 4 megs, as it does in Britain. We're one of the very few countries, I think with the exception of Japan, where things are very limited on 80 metres, that we were only allowed to go from 3.5 to 3.7, and then a little tiny window, a DX window, up near 4 megs. Which I've never used. In America, they call 3.7 to 4 the 75 metre band, and that's where most of the phone activity occurs, and 3.5 to 3.7 is largely digital WSJT, CW and other non-voice modes. So it's almost impossible to work on 80 metres across the Pacific without working split mode. And a great pity, I think. The Quad 2 amplifier, a friend of mine in Sydney has one. They do sound quite good, but any number of less expensive solid-state amplifiers these days, properly designed, sound as good or better. And really, if you get a really well-designed valve amplifier and a really good, well-designed transistor amplifier, really are the tiny differences in low-level distortion something that the ear can hear, or is it something that you would be induced to expect because you know it's a valve amplifier and you have greater expectations? That's part of the psychology of the subjectivist position that I was talking about and reading about from Douglas Self's thesis. Just on the subject of books, while I've got the video stream up, one book that was a great inspiration for me as a young man, may have been for you too, particularly Dave, was a very thick book called The Radiotron Designer's Handbook, otherwise The Radio Designer's Handbook, by Fritz Langford Smith, who was a Sydneyite, and it's the better part of 1,500 pages of really solid design data dating from the last days of the valve. I think the last edition, which I have here, is 1967. This edition, which largely replaces that for me, was given to me by very graciously by Jeff VK3VJS, was spare to his need. This now replaces my original copy, which has been used so much that it's disintegrated to the point where it's just a pile of papers in a box. So it's good to have the book back again. It gives things like nomographs of capacitance and inductance with tuned circuit frequency, wavelength, all the rest of it. Conductivity of solids, resistor color codes, fuse diameters of wires, insulated wire preferred diameters, temperature rise and ratings, reactance, impedance and resonance measurements. It's a very handy text, and I don't care what people say about internet. Having it all in one little book where you can reach into one place in your shelf and you can memorize which page it is you're looking for, to me has great advantages over the internet with its simple word search. And the great thing about a book of this type is that you learn a lot by serendipity, by what's near the page that you're looking at. I wonder if you've had that experience, either of you. The other book I'd like to raise for people who are listening, either on the stream or on radio, is this book called The Audiophiles Project Sourcebook, 60 high-performance, or rather 80 high-performance audio electronics projects by Randy Sloan. Published, let me see, about 15 years ago, I think. But still, all of the components required are contemporary, still available. It was published, let me see, where's the date? ISBN number. Bloody hell, they don't give the date. The date. I think the date's about 2002. Yeah, 2002. So it's 19 years. But it has sections on audio preamplifiers, headphone amplifiers, audio power amps, power supplies, protection circuits, constructional information, how to make printed circuit boards, what heat sinks you should use and how much of for temperature rise, all that sort of stuff. And it doesn't involve any of the BS that you see in some of the audio fools publications where they talk about warm sound from valves, whatever they mean by that. Or all of those other buzzwords like presence and crystal clarity. It just, unless it's linked to flatness of frequency response. I mean, if you get somebody quoting 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz plus or minus 2 dB, that means something. Crisp doesn't. Anyway, VK3ACZ, VK3AML, and with a pause for any breakers.
3ZIG.
Acknowledging VK3ZIG. Nice to hear you there, George, but I'll hand it round first of all to Peter 3ACZ.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group with VK3ZIG just arrived. Good evening, George, and VK3ACZ. Yeah, what you were saying before about 80 metres, you reminded me I was a little bit envious just this week. I was tuning above 3.700 and heard two ZL nets running at the same time, one about 3.714 and the other one maybe another 15 kilohertz higher than that, and all I could feel was jealous. Yeah, I'm definitely not talking about the DX window. I'm talking about the fact that we don't have that allocation, and the Americans have right all the way up to 3.8, don't they, or something similar. But anyway, David, I thought what might interest you is, like I've been trying to hit the DX on 20 metres hard while conditions are good, making hay while the sun shines, on whichever day it was this week, G4AKC, I think it was, AKC, yeah, push bike mobile in Blackpool, Lancashire, by the coast, by the water. I was absolutely stunned. In fact, I almost didn't want to believe it. Long path and all, both of us on 100 watts, and 5x4 both ways. It was only when I looked at his QRZ page that, yes, he's got a trailer on the back of his push bike, and I'm pretty sure he actually said he was riding the bike while he was speaking to me. So that was a novelty. That's one I've not done before and may not do again for a while. But, yeah, push bike mobile on 20 metres. Should be more of it. In fact, with my interest in going portable, I wonder if I should look into that myself. Hi. But anyway, so that's a little novelty. Well, I'll put it back to you, Chris, so that you can bring George in. VK3AML on the group, VK3ACZ.
Nice results on that. Very good to hear, but I'll hand it round to George for his input. And how are things in beautiful downtown Healesville, or sort of a beautiful downtown Healesville hinterland tonight? VK3ZIG, VK3AML. Having trouble hearing you, George. Have you moved from the previous location? I'm not quite sure whether anybody else can hear you, but I got only bits of that. Will you be back in a place where you can transmit with a bit more oomph? Could anybody copy that?
Yes, it's VK3 Echo Charlie Golf. Yes, George, I could hear you okay. You're dropping out a little bit, but otherwise okay. Yes, George is mobile, and I think he'd moved from that first call he made when I could hear him perfectly well, but he's starting to dip down, I think, now, and disappearing in bits and pieces there, Chris. So, but he's mobile and travelling, so that's probably why the signal's disappearing a bit. Back to you, VK3AML and the group, VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
Well, you could try it, George, but I'm not quite sure whether we'll hear very much of you. You want to give it another try? VK3ZIG, VK3AML. I'm hearing nothing.
No, I can't hear him either.
No, he seems to have disappeared. Okay, I'll hand it over to you, Dave, VK3CG, VK3AML. Oh, by the way, Dave, my friend in Sydney with the quad valve amp uses it to activate two very elderly quad electrostatic loudspeakers, which are the strangest looking things you've ever seen, but the most transparent loudspeakers I think I've ever heard. They're very impressive. They can't give much volume before they clip, but they are incredibly flat. VK3 ECG, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3 Echo Charlie Golf. Yes, they are absolutely amazing. I did have a pair for a while, but this is the ESL 57s, which were the ones that were really designed, I suppose, to go with that Quad 2 amplifier. The Quad 22 preamp was not very good. It was very noisy, but the speakers with the power amp were very, very nice. And eventually I swapped them and I've got the later version, but one of them is the membrane starting to I think become loose, and it just starts to crackle with the because there's quite a voltage across them, sort of 100,000 volts across the membrane, the sort of mylar membrane. And those are the 63s. And 63s were probably a little bit less directional, and they had a slightly better bass response, but the clarity is absolutely stunning. I had some sort of musicians around one for a while, for a Christmas do, and we were listening to and comparing some different speakers and so on, and they were just knocked away by them. They're just extraordinary sound. And they are absolutely lovely. Again, they're not something you play heavy music on. They're not something, it's particularly for sort of the chamber music and really, as I said, sort of classical guitar, voice, absolutely stunning sound. But as you say, I mean, to be honest, good transistor amplifiers are absolutely stunning, and I really don't think there's an awful lot of difference. I mean, a lot of it, I think, with some of the old valve equipment was less about the technology of the valve as opposed to transistor, and more about the quality sometimes of the components, particularly the transformers, the output transformers, and things like that, which I don't think you get to the same degree today. But you know, sort of there we are. Great to hear about, Peter, your portable. This is something I'm trying to sort of get into a little bit, and as I'm starting to do a little bit of cutting back on my hours at work and working fewer days per week, and from sort of now on, I'm hoping to be able to get out and about and do a bit of portable. That's one of the sort of things I've been sort of putting together. I've been building some little antennas and did some of those sort of QRP guys, kits and things like that. So, and I'd like to get my Morse back up again, which I've, you know, was never very good at, but you know, I think there's been some increasing interest in sort of the slower Morse these days, and so that might give me a little bit of hope. So I put together one of the little lockdown things was I put together and built a little Morse transceiver for 40 meters. So I'll have a go at that, and maybe I'll be tempted to do something for 20 as well. You never know. But they seem to be quite speed merchants on 20. Anyway, Chris, back to you. VK3 AML and the group VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
Do we have any other breakers there, VK3AML? No, nothing heard, and I'm sorry, we seems to have lost 3ZIG there. I know that George has a fairly large farm property now, and his new shack is, I think, being built on a high spot, whereas their actual farmhouse is on a low spot, and he may have been up there, but I imagine that if he has no mains power up there, it must be pretty bloody cold. Anyway, if George cares to come back when he's later on in a better position or a more comfortable position, more to the point, please do break in between the overs, George. VK3ZIG. Yeah, electrostatic loudspeakers, I mean, just as with electrostatic microphones, reducing the mass of the moving diaphragm, thereby flattening the frequency response, because you no longer have the tuned circuit, the audio tuned circuit produced by the mass of the microphone versus its restorative moment in probably the tension of the diaphragm, forces the resonant frequency up, usually out of the audio range. That certainly applies to condenser mics of the Neumann type or of the electret type. And I imagine it applies to electrostatic loudspeakers too. Many, many years ago, when I was first interested in audio, maybe when I was 17, 18, I went round to an audiophile friend's place. He was a chap who collected cylinder phonographs, and he lived in Cuthbert Road Reservoir, a chap named Tony Savoury, one of the early members of the Phonograph Society of Australia, a society of record collectors specialising in cylinders and 78 RPM discs. But he also had an interest in high-quality vinyl, Deutsche Grammophon pressings where they'd only pressed something like 100 copies from each master and all of that sort of thing in the days of vinyl. And he had a pair of then incredibly expensive condenser headphones called Stax, S-T-A-X. I remember there was a power unit with them, which was a little box about half the size of a shoebox, and presumably gave several hundred volts of polarizing voltage plus very high impedance audio drive for these things. Anyway, you'd stick the needle onto an LP, a vinyl, while wearing these Stax headphones listening. And the flatness of response down to incredibly low frequencies meant that you could just about hear the rumble of the rotational speed of the record if it was going at 45. Like you could physically feel the diaphragms of these headphones going in and out at very low frequencies and reproducing it perfectly. The trouble was that those headphones were so flat and so transparent that you could hear every fault in the record, all of the tracing, distortion, and of course in those days at age 17, 18, I had a very good pair of ears. I don't think I do these days. I've probably been affected by high-level pop music in the 70s, so that I have a bit of a hole at 4 kilohertz, which doesn't do anything for my ability to decipher low-level voice signals against noise, not just on radio, but when I'm in a group situation in a noisy club or cafe. One of the things you have to look forward to as you get into your dotage, unfortunately. But those Stax headphones certainly made an impression, as did the Leak electrostatic loudspeakers, and it's the only time I've heard anything to compare with really good, top-notch moving coil loudspeaker enclosures of 4 or 5 times the volume and size. Considering that those Leak electrostatic speakers were released in the 50s and probably had their peak of sales around 1960, it's a wonder nobody has repeated their release. There's not much to them. I mean, it's not as if you're making some fine voice coil and a pot magnet and the whole enclosure. They're just a sheet of mylar with 2 sheets of mesh either side. There's nothing to them. The drive system for the high impedance is the tricky bit, I suppose. Sorry I'm raving, but these are all sort of byways of the area of sound reproduction. And even with amateur radio, where the frequency response is far more limited, there is still, I find, great advantages in using a high-quality loudspeaker system, even when you're limited to 3 kilohertz of operation. I have in this room, I think those on the stream can see, if I point at it, the Wharfdale bookshelf speakers, reentrant enclosures that are flat down to about 60 or 70 hertz, which is all I really need for most of my purposes, because most of the records I listen to are 78s made prior to 1930. What an admission. But then so does Steve 3SL, VK3ACZ, and the group VK3AML.
VK3AML and the group from VK3ACZ. Well, that's interesting, Chris, that you report a bit of loss at 4,000 cycles. I can blame Genesis and Yes for 6K, a few dB down there. And that was, of all things, a set of ex-military headphones that had that sort of suction cup kind of attached to your head about it. That really wouldn't have been too good, but at the time it was thoroughly enjoyable. But I know before I finished my working life, I had to have a hearing test to determine that I wasn't going to come back and sue the department. And the worst part about those hearing tests is that my pulse thumps so loud I can hardly hear the sounds. But no, apparently it wasn't bad enough to require any kind of external help. But anyway, that's the story of it. And Dave, I smiled when you mentioned the possibility of you going portable. In my case, it's fairly compulsory because I just have too much QR Mary here at home. I've got neighbours 2 doors down that are running an illegal growing operation, and the constabulary don't seem to care. So I lose 20 and 40 metres while that hydroponic setup is working, and it just it's very saddening. But all the same, I've been incredibly surprised with how well I've done with just a squid pole, an end fed up that same pole, a stake in the ground or an earth rod in the ground to have something for the end fed to push off, and it's been wonderful. Occasionally you get people come up to ask you what you're doing. Occasionally there's you into CB, are you? And thanks for the insult, but no. You do. It's a nice way of meeting people occasionally. I used to think that going into the park with a dog was a good way of meeting YLs once upon a time. Well, being somewhere semi-open with amateur radio is a good one too. It's just a pity that so often you get people wanting to start up a conversation just when you're trying to listen for the DX, or your turn is about to come up with somebody who's just doing signal reports and moving on to the next one. But no, it's all been good. The other thing is the 100 amp hour lithium battery is marvellous because it weighs about 7 kilos. So I can carry it along with the shopping trolley, and I just park myself up a hill about 300-400 metres from where I can park the car, and it's a semi-rural, outer suburban-ish kind of location, not too far from home. So all pretty good. I definitely recommend it, and good on you for doing the CW too. Back to you, Chris. VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
He said, remembering to turn up the microphone gain this time. Before we move on, 100 amp hour lithium battery. Do you mind me asking where you got it from, how much it cost? I'd be very interested in that. And how you charge it. Are you just using a power supply with a current meter in series with it and switch it off at a certain point, or do you have a special charger for it? Because this lithium technology really is making all sorts of medium power, 30 in the order of 30 watts, possible for pedestrian mobile operation. When I bought 7 amp hour lithium iron phosphate batteries for the first time about 2 years ago, I could not believe how much power was possible on an efficient transmitter using this new battery technology. So could you tell me more, Peter? I'm sure if I'm interested, I'm sure a lot of other people would be as well. 100 amp hour, interesting. VK3 ACZ, VK3AML.
Yeah, 3AML from 3ACZ. Well, the charger is one of the commercial, it's a Victron Energy Blue Smart charger it's called, and it senses what kind of battery it is, as they all seem to do nowadays, and just super. I started out with a 100 amp hour glass mat, and that weighs 35 kilos. Needless to say, it doesn't go too far from the car. And there's no way known I would carry that up this, even though it's only about 300 metres up a hill. Absolutely no one known. No, the lithium's a godsend. I wish I could say more than I've got a relative or someone in the family who's a Sparky, and he got me at a trade price, which was $450, and I priced them at about $850, $900. So I was rather pleased. It just goes to show what we're paying on the top of everything, too. But it's a great little battery with its nylon cord handles, plastic covered handles, and it's just about the right size, that it's not too intrusive. And as I said, I carry it alongside the shopping trolley. It won't fit in the shopping trolley, but yeah, pretty good all the same. The big saving thing about it is the weight. And I understand too that sideband's pretty hard on batteries, apparently, with the big sudden increase in current demand and all that. Hopefully it'll last me quite a while. Back to you, Chris. VK3AML, VK3ACZ.
Do we have any breakers there? I thought I heard a brief heterodyne beneath Peter, VK3AML, standing by. No, nobody there. Okay, yeah, well, I think I acquired my 7 amp hour lithium iron phosphates for about $45, and the price is steadily falling. 45 was the best I could do, whereas I can get 7 amp hour gel cells for about 25, but they weigh about 4 times as much, and for somebody who's operating pedestrian mobile as I do, the gel cells are just out of the question. I'd be booking myself into the coronary ward before doing any portable work if I was using lead acid gel cells. But yeah, fascinating. And as these things become less and less expensive, although I must say, when you said that the standard trade price was, what was it, $800 or something, I thought, whoa, I think I'll wait a few years before I get into that. Nevertheless, it's very interesting to see what it makes possible. At the moment, as you may know, I'm building a very large light beam communications unit. Large lenses, very high output LED, 30 watts in a chip that's 1 millimetre by 1 millimetre. It'll put out a beam of light that's fearsome, modulated by the voice or by digital information if necessary. And of course, the thing that makes that practicable as a portable system is lithium battery technology. It's just revolutionised everything that requires high power and low weight. I better hand it round to Dave, VK3ECG, and it looks like we're now past midnight, so we better start thinking of wrapping up. But delighted that both of you could come back to me after tonight's effort. And nice to catch up once a week too. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much, Peter. And I'll hand it round to Dave, VK3ECG, and the group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group VK3 Echo Charlie Golf. Yes, absolutely. Lithium cells have made an incredible change. As I said, I've just got one of those little 7 amp hour ones, and it's just so light. I actually found a little motorcycle one, which is, I think it's only 4 amp hour, something like that. But it goes into a little camera lens pouch. So that's one of the things I'll probably tried to use, particularly with some of the smaller low-power CW. You don't really need very much at all. And again, with single sideband, it just depends on what sort of, again, it goes back to what Bob Heil was saying about compression. As soon as you put the compression up, you'll be starting to draw an awful lot more current than you will on a non-compressed audio. Just pushes out much more RF, but that's to be expected. Yes, it's interesting. You commented before about the frequencies, and yes, 2 meters in the UK was only 144 to 146, and well, I brought, I think, one of my 2 meter things with me when I came, and then realised that it just didn't have the coverage. So I quickly sold that on and got something else. But the other advantage, of course, there are a few other things. So there's 4 meters in the UK, 70 megs, which is again an interesting band, and sometimes has some really interesting DX you can do there. But not quite like 6. There are some significant differences, and yes, you certainly have more on 80 than is available here. Yeah, the speakers are great. Actually, the quad electrostatic speakers, I mean, they went from the 57 to the 63s, and they then reproduced the 63 in a modern format without the wooden enclosure, but a sort of plastic enclosure. But again, exactly the same technology and the membranes and so on. And I think there's a model of 2905 or something like that, which is incredibly expensive, but really is no different. They just use these diode cascades to get the to generate the high voltages, and those little stacked headphones do exactly the same. They were like the big sort of almost like big rectangular speakers that sort of hung off the top of your head and just sort of sat on your ears. But some years ago I found some of the little old stacks, really old ones, that had the round ordinary looking headphones but with a little box. And again, I think they're still doing something like 20 kV or something across them. I'm not sure whether you need 20 kV across your head. It smacks of ECT, but hopefully nothing shorts out. And they are actually, as you say, absolutely amazing. You just hear absolutely everything. You've just got to be careful not to tap one of the earpieces, because what happens is that it causes the mylar membrane to just touch, and then it desaturates loses the charge on the membrane and across the membrane, and then of course that earpiece goes dull and dead for a while, and then it gradually comes back as the voltage and charge builds up on it again. So it's quite an interesting effect. I haven't gone around tapping my speakers in the same way though. I think that's asking for trouble. Anyway, I won't hold it too long. I'm actually I would have been up in Sydney this weekend for a conference, but of course the conference was not cancelled. It's moved to be entirely online. So I spent most of Friday and all of today actually at the conference online, and it will also be going on tomorrow morning as well, and finishes around lunchtime. So I shall be following all that quite intently. So I better get to bed. So I make sense tomorrow morning. So I won't hold it anymore then. Thanks very much. It's been great chats to you, and all the best with the portable. I'll start to get some of my stuff organised for a bit of portable work hopefully soon. I did walk up onto the little Mount Lofty bit along the river in Wonga Park the other day, and sat up there on the picnic bench, and that was quite fun. Anyway, but I need to get a bit more sophisticated than on that occasion. So this is VK3 Echo Charlie Golf signing with VK3AML and VK3ACZ, and if George is still there, VK3ZIG listening, all the best to you as well. Cheers then.
Yeah, cheers. Cheers, Dave, and thanks for coming up. Always very worthwhile to hear from you, and having you in the conversation more than peps it up. Thank you so much. And Peter 3ACZ, hope to be there on Monday night, I presume about 7 p.m, Wesleyan Church, Pine Avenue. Hope I have that right, Baronia. And anybody else who might be interested in the Sherbrooke Radio Club, it usually has an attendance of, from my own observation, between 12 and 20 people. So for a small group, it's very active. And it'll be interesting to find out what the syllabus item is. Peter, do you have any idea what they're going to be talking about, or is it just the first meeting in the new venue? VK3ACZ. All the best too, Dave, but VK3ACZ, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML from VK3ACZ in the diminishing group. And good evening, Dave. Thank you for coming up. Your contribution is appreciated by me as well. And the other thing about going portable, it's you're hearing sideband how you're meant to hear it, not with horrible sine waves in the background of the audio or snap, crackle and pop and all the rest of it. It's just almost eerie to hear bands that are normally so noisy at home absolutely dead quiet, and that you could hear a pin drop, just wonderful. So the real bonus or benefit of going portable. And whatever's on the menu for Monday night, I don't know. Yeah, around about 1900 will do. I think it's full steam ahead at 19:30, but be there around 7. And it's Pine Crescent. Not that matters. It's only it's about 10 minutes walk, if that, from the station. It's nice and handy. You just cross Baronia Road. Is that it, Baronia Road? Yeah, and you're almost there. So, and as I've always said, we'll get you home again afterwards. No drama about that. You won't need to rely on the public transport. And again, I'll just say thank you once more for the broadcast, for the effort that you go to every week to do it. The highlight for me is going to remain hearing Lionel. And I appreciated the little tribute you put out to him as well, with explaining how he got you into amateur radio. We can thank him for a lot, although, well, we can't, but you know what I mean. We have gratitude for him getting you into the hobby, because there's no doubt it's better off for your contribution to it, and you do a great job. Anyway, look forward to seeing you then. Yes, my final. I'll say good night to you and your listeners, and look forward to next week. Cheers, Chris, VK3AML from VK3ACZ.
Yep, no breakers. VK3ACZ, VK3AML returning. Well, I don't know what you think of the idea, but what I would like to do is to bring my video camera around on Monday night for the Pine Crescent thing and do a little bit of coverage in it, maybe even interview Jim, yourself, if you're both there, as an insert for next Saturday's transmission, because I can now, through OBS software, insert video, as you've probably seen, and I can do it to a reasonable standard. Incidentally, tonight, I don't know why, not a single dropped frame in 2 hours and 45 minutes of operation. So it's worked like an absolute charm from beginning to end. The audio's been okay, the video's been spot on. It's 720p, reasonably high def. If it continues at this level, I might push it to 1080p. But I don't want to push my luck too much, because we have had weeks where it's been really unreliable at that speed. But at this speed, no problem. 12.6% CPU usage, virtually nothing. 2 hours 46 minutes and no dropped frames in that time. I am flabbergasted. Just as a final thing, Peter, what do you think of the idea? Will anybody object if I bring a video camera around and interview a few people for next Saturday? VK3ACZ, VK3AML.
Yeah, 3AML, 3ACZ. I wouldn't think so, Chris, but a few of us would probably think that we've got great faces for radio rather than video. Hi. But no, I don't think so. And again, I don't know if anything's, well, something must have been planned, but as I said, I don't know what it is. But it'll be, whatever it is, it'll be something good. And even if, would you be prepared to give a spiel if the ball was put in your court, I just wonder, Chris?
Oh, well, what I was intending to do is to spend the next month up to August putting together something specific to amateur radio and occupying a half hour on video dealing with Deal Island. So if I could put that off for 1 month, that'd be better. As you as you've seen from these Saturday night sessions, I can usually find something to talk about. But I hadn't thought about Monday. I'd prefer to find out who's doing what on Monday and then get a video of it with the idea of filling in some of the time next Saturday, if that's okay by you. VK3ACZ. But for August, I certainly would be interested in throwing something together, if that's possible. VK3ACZ, VK3AML.
Yeah, no worries, Chris. And yeah, well, it's up to Greg. Greg will have had something planned, 3KWX. Anyway, so no, I was just putting out the idea to see if you would be ready. But no, August sounds good, and it'll be fun. Looking forward to it. Anyway, I will make this my final definitely this time and say 7-3 and catch up with you Monday night. Hopefully, all things being even. Yeah, cheers and good night to you there, Chris.
He said, forgetting to put up the audio level again. Okay, thanks so much to everybody who's listened in on the internet stream as well as on 147.475. We will be back next Saturday night, which will be the 11th of July at 9:30 p.m. Melbourne time for another session. To go through, what is it, nearly 3 hours we usually do this transmission for. Tonight's a particularly cold night, incidentally, for those who are living outside Melbourne. It's only about 1 degree outside, so I imagine the number of people who are trying to listen in their Radio Shacks would be finding this difficult. Thank you very much to VK3AF, who I've not seen on the text box before, who's come up tonight on the stream. Van Dan Escobar, again, thank you. Terry Sims, and the old friend from 40 years ago, Peter Marks, the ABC's own science and technology commentator, who was with us, I think, for a period earlier in the transmission. So this is VK3AML now concluding the stream, VK3AML 3 July 2021, and concluding also on 147.475. Good night, fellas.